Hi, so here's my try at true crime. I'm gonna try my best to tell you the story without it sounding crazy and without it sounding too scripted, because I did have to go through a lot of the story and compile it together to be able to create a story that you can understand. So, this is a cold case story about a little girl, 7-year-old girl. Her name was Maria Ridolph case. It's the Maria Ridolph case of 50 years. This happened 50 years ago. So it's one of the oldest cases in America. It's actually the oldest case in America. She's born on March 12th, 1950, and died in 1957. She disappeared on December 3rd, 1957. From a street corner called Center Cross Street and Sycamore Street in Illinois when she was just 7. When she was just 7 years old, Mariah was last seen by a friend named Kathy. Mariah was born to Michael and Frances Ivy Ridolph. Ridolph was the youngest of 4 children, 2 sisters and a brother. Her father worked at a local factory in Sycamore, and her mother was a housewife and a housemaker. At the time of the abduction, Mariah was 7 years old, 44 inches tall, weighed 53 pounds, and she had brown eyes and brown hair, and she was an honors student in the 2nd grade. According to her mother, Mariah was high-strung, and I'm going to quote her. She said, "Mariah was a nervous girl, and if she got into trouble, she would become hysterical, and I was the only one that was able to calm her down." That's what her mother said. So someone would probably have to kill her mother said, to keep her quiet. I'm the only one who could calm her down. Mariah was also described as a screamer. Apparently she was a loud girl. She was afraid of the dark. Her best friend was 8-year-old Kathy Sigmund. She lived on the same street as the Ridolphs. As the story goes, Mariah's older brother, then he was 11 years old, he recalls that his sister Mariah couldn't wait till the first snowfall. She rushed out to play with Kathy at around 6 p.m., just as flurries were beginning to fall and the dark night settled in, Chuck said. Chuck was her brother. Today, I'm sure a lot of parents are saying, how could that young little girl go out after dark, hanging out on the corner street? But well, that was the norm back then. Just remember, this was 50 years ago. So, in this little town of Illinois, in this Sycamore, nobody really locked their doors, So, it was normal not to lock your doors. It was relatively safe. It was an area which, was like family-oriented area where you can raise little children, where you don't think anything bad would happen. At the time Mariah, when she was playing with her friend Kathy, they were playing a game called Duck the Cars. The game went like this. The kid would go around the pole until a car would come up the street, and then you had to get behind a tree before the car light hit you. Police officers believe the kidnapper had his car parked on the road. He may have seen the girls playing. The girls playing Kathy, Mariah's friend, said she'd never seen this man before. So Kathy went on to say the man who introduced himself as Johnny offered them a piggyback ride, which Mariah gladly accepted. While on Johnny's back, he went 20 feet away with her, and then he came back and asked if the 2 girls liked dolls. He asked the girls, he said, "Do you like dolls?" So Mariah went home to bring back a doll to show this John. To get her doll, brought it back with her, and then Kathy said she's going home to get mittens because she had gotten cold. She left John and Mariah there, standing there on the corner, and then when Kathy got back, they were gone. No sign of the doll or anybody. Imagine how frightened a child can be. She comes back and her friend is gone. Like, what's she supposed to think, People later recalled hearing a scream around 7 p.m., where they later found her doll in the alley. They found her doll later on in the alleyway. Parents and police did thorough searches, talked to over 1,000 people in the community. On April 1958, the case went from kidnapped to homicide, when her tiny little body was found partially clothed 90 miles away near Galena, Illinois. A farmer and his wife wound up finding the body partially concealed under a downed tree. The case went cold for 2 years, but Kathy never stopped looking for that face, Johnny, that she'd seen, the man named Johnny. There was a family nearby called the Tessier family. The man called John, who was seen with Maria, was John Tessier, the neighbor to Maria Ridolph. John Tessier, one of 7 children, John was described by the community as an outsider and creepy. You know, like you ever have like those people in the community where you just like want to keep your children away from, or he was like considered that to the community. John was described as having erratic behaviors around young girls, such as giving a girl a piggyback ride and refusing to put her down, at which point her father had to come running to pry her off his back and threatened to kill Johnny. Johnny was also accused of raping several minors, but when questioned about the murder of Maria, he passed a polygraph test. So Johnny, he was ruled out as a suspect for 50 years. The case was reopened at one point, in which Kathy was shown a picture of Johnny and said, yes, that's the man. That's the man. Kathy is Mariah's friend, and she remembered that man, and she said, that's him. Despite all this, John had an alibi. He left home 7 days after Mariah's murder and enlisted in the United States Air Force in Rockland, Illinois. Can you imagine? This guy that's like a murder suspect joins the military. It was confirmed by recruitment police officers that they had spoken to Johnny at the time. A collect call was traced in Rockford, Illinois, which was 40 miles from the abduction site. And an unused train ticket was found to Rockford. It was found in Johnny's possession. Investigators say the timeline was one where Tessier kidnapped Maria and then drove, thus the unused ticket he drove, to Rockford in time to make the call at 6:57 p.m. and meet with the same recruiting officers at 7:15 p.m. Under this timeline, it was determined that Maria was kidnapped at 6:20 p.m. John was called in for questioning but was extremely hostile, and there were many discrepancies in his story. Maria's body was exhumed, but there was no DNA evidence linking John forensically. Different inmates said Johnny confessed to the murder. However, he had confessed to killing Maria, I don't know how to say her name. They had confessed, like the accounts that the people in jail said that John had confessed to them, it was he had killed them he had killed Maria in a couple of different ways. He told a different story to all of the inmates, you know. So Johnny was convicted by jury at 73 years old, was set to die in prison, a guilty man. How was John convicted in the first place? Well, John had raped his sister Jean and molested many of his family members and others on John's mother's deathbed. So he basically was a sicko, you know. He was busy having his good old time with his family members, his sister. He was not a good guy. He was quite the monster. On her deathbed, she told her daughters that she had lied to police about John's alibi and that John was responsible for killing at least 2 girls, according to John's sisters. John was not at home the night Maria went missing, and their mother had lied to FBI agents to protect him. So now his alibi is falling apart. Janet Tessier said she tried over many years to tell police just to be ignored. Again in 2008, she wrote to the state police in Illinois. They finally reopened the case. They presented again John's picture to Kathy, in which she confirmed John to be the man last seen with Maria. The case brought together the 2 families united in tragedy. The Tesler family, who was abused by their brother John, and the Ridolph family, who lost Maria. It seems that John and his father would abuse the girls sexually for many years, but it was a secret, she said. Nobody would suspect that their brother was such a demon. Imagine John, for decades, was a police officer living in Seattle under a new name, Jack McCullough. When the police accused him of the murder, he creepily got on the defense, saying, "I didn't kidnap that little girl. Look into my eyes. She was loved in the neighborhood. She was a little girl with big brown eyes, and she was sweet as could be, hardly said a word to anyone, and everyone loved her." The police officers, that was a red flag. The detailed description of the child. It appeared he was describing someone he was obsessed with, but that he thought a lot about. Even more astounding, John claimed to knowing who killed her. Classic for a killer to offer his services to find the real murderer. That's a classic ploy. They use the murderers to take the spotlight off of them. So there was no real physical evidence tying John to the murder, only circumstantial evidence. Keep in mind, the murder happened over 50 years ago. His sister Jeannie told officers one time John raped her in cold anger and then shared her with his friends. That's what kind of monster he was. He was tried for that, even though statute of limitations had already passed. But because John, or Jack, or we'll say John, returned to the military and never came back to his jurisdiction, the statute didn't apply. John was found not guilty. He was found not guilty of the rapes. Basically, his sister had gone all the way to court to try to put him behind bars for what he'd done to her, but nobody believed her, and she said that it was like tearing open an old wound, and it was so painful just to be, put on the stand like that, and to be cross-examined and questioned, and to reveal like all her intimate details. It was just like she felt like a criminal, and she felt humiliated, and it was really unpleasant. So he wasn't indicted for that because there was no like physical evidence or whatever. So he was not guilty. He was not found guilty of the rapes. On a different note, John was tried for Maria's murder on September 14th, 2012. So he was tried on September 14th, 2012, and was found guilty by the judge, and he was sentenced to life in prison. But that would change on April 15th, 2016, at a hearing inside a packed Illinois courtroom. After serving 5 years out of his life sentence, Jack McCullough was set free. He has since been setting up a case to sue local authorities for wrongful conviction. So that's the story of little Maria Ridolph, who was murdered by this man, and he was set free, unfortunately. And that's my try at telling you the story of true crime, cold case from 50 plus years ago. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.